Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for attending our first Insight webinar series of 2022. We started in 2021. We had great events then, and we decided to do it for another year at least. So this is our first event in 2022. And we'll look to have productive discussions in all the months ahead of us in 2022. Thank you. I would like to start by thanking the following organization for partnering with us for this event today. Emily Canada, thank you so much, Emily Canada, Agwest Bio, and Gowlings, the law firm. But before we begin our moderated discussion, I do have a few technical notes to share, and the chat bar will not be active for the attendees. That said, you can ask your questions using the Q&A button. If you see a question asked by another attendee that you like, you may upvote the question in order to move it up the queue. If you prefer to ask your question verbally, please use the raised hand button next to the Q&A button, and then I will identify you and you'll be asked to unmute yourself to ask the question. Innovation and an adoption framework will help create a vision on accelerating digitalization and help resolve hurdles that currently exist to build a supportive policy. Some of the hurdles that need to be resolved include rural connectivity. Rural operations need reliable connectivity to accelerate sustainable ag as the technology develops. Supply chain, a coordinated approach is needed amongst the industry to drive change across the supply chain and move forward together. There is no doubt that Agtech accelerates sustainability, supports increased food production, and increased food safety. We need to develop an innovation and adoption framework to support the acceleration of Agtech implementation. This is one of the reasons AIC called for the development of a national strategy on agri-food research and innovation, something that about 30 different organizations have joined us to ask for this in a recent past, and we are presenting this to various parliamentary committees as we've done last week, and we will continue to do so in the near future. We had a few articles lately on this. So if you do represent an organization that hasn't joined us yet for this call for a national policy, please do so. In the meantime, to discuss the issue today, we are extremely pleased to welcome our panel of experts. And joining us are Mike Dietrich, Director of Business Development for Animal Health at TELUS Agriculture, Alana Natiu, Mayor of Sturgeon County, Alberta, Heather Watson, Executive Director at Farm Management Canada. Before beginning the moderated discussion, I do have a few prepared questions, but then I will invite attendees to still ask their questions as we go. I do now invite our panelists to say a few words about themselves and their organization. Starting by you, Mike, if you don't mind saying a few words.
I'd be happy to, Serge. Thank you for the introduction. Great to be with you all here today, and looking forward to the discussion. Maybe I'll start a little bit with just a quick overview of myself. I've spent 35 years now in the telecoms industry within Canada, building infrastructure, maintaining infrastructure, and supporting it on a go-forward basis. So I think the topic of today's discussion probably touch on that, and I think it's something that I look forward to discussing. I've had the privilege, though, however, the last 4 years of my career specifically and exclusively focused on technological adaptation into agriculture and agri-food systems. And that has been a very interesting journey thus far. From a TELUS perspective, we are we're really compelled and drawn to this idea of technological innovation in agri-food and agriculture, because we really believe it's really fundamentally solving a generational problem, right? This idea of what are we going to do to feed the world in a way that's sustainable and realistic, while kind of maintaining this focus on technological innovation and supporting food system growers, producers to operate more efficiently, and even more so to give Canadian producers an advantage on the global stage through leveraging technology. So we've been busy looking at how to interconnect the value chain. We were inspired initially by the work we did in TELUS Health, where we were taking, arguably an industry there that was under penetrated in terms of technological adaptation, and we began to stitch together the health ecosystem within Canada, taking disparate systems, connecting them, and enabling some pretty remarkable outcomes in terms of efficiency of that system and better health outcomes for Canadians. And that inspiration had us looking at food systems and thinking, there's a lot of core competency we've developed in terms of how we take technology and integrate it into an important industry such as healthcare. And we saw a lot of overlaps. And I think probably the most significant one was the idea of how closely related healthcare systems and food systems are in our world, and how important those two are from a social purpose perspective. And those ingredients, so that experience, our desire to and our attraction towards social purpose outcomes is something that drew us into food systems and agriculture systems. And here we are almost 4 years later, and we now have the better part of 1,300 team members globally at TELUS working exclusively on this challenge. And we now have, or proud to have, about 15 of the top 20 global food brands as customers, helping us in contributing to this, to this challenge and to our experience every day. So yeah, we're really, really happy to be here participating in the discussion. I think it's a very meaningful one, and yeah, definitely looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, Mike. Mayor, would you like to be next? And first, thank you for joining us today as well. I'm looking forward to hearing from you as well.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. Mayor of Sturgeon County, we've got almost 400,000 acres of land in production. The majority of that is type 1 soils. Main crops here are canola and wheat, with a tie for alfalfa and barley behind that. We're certainly, there's 20,000 residents spread out around 2,000 square kilometers. So we are struggling to find that balance of conserving ag land and making sure that we don't sprawl, but knowing that with the depopulation of rural municipalities, that means fewer customers and fewer subscribers, which is, part of the reason why we've been struggling to see the implementation of internet and broadband out into rural areas, because the business case isn't necessarily there. But as Michael spoke to, we need it for education, we need it for healthcare, and we need it for the technology that's going to be needed to be able to support affordable efficiencies in farming and in food, fuel, fiber production. So there's certainly a big struggle there, and Sturgeon County has very recently committed to spending $7 million on the first of 6 phases of broadband to be rolled out in Sturgeon County to be able to facilitate the access to broadband, because right now we know the federal government has said that most Canadians should be able to have that 50-10, 50 down, 10 up, but the average in Sturgeon County is between 11 and as low as 3 for download speeds. So you can imagine how frustrating that is for producers to not be able to access the global market on the internet, either to look for information or to be able to connect and buy and sell products. So it's certainly the digital divide is having a huge impact on our ability to educate our students so that they can be competitive, and it certainly puts our businesses in a less competitive situation. So we need to address that. So that's just one of the things I keep busy at, advocating for there to be some change in the eligibility requirements around accessing both provincial and federal dollars. Although in most parts of Sturgeon County, you can actually see downtown Edmonton, you don't have high-speed internet. So there was some confusion when the federal universal broadband funding was created. They didn't necessarily look at actual download speeds. They asked internet service providers where they did business. And so if you had a certain number of ISPs doing business in your area, you were considered that your needs were met. And in fact, CIRA, the Canadian Internet Registry Association, has proven through speed tests that the eligibility requirements are not necessarily factual. So, which is why we've had to, debenture to borrow millions to be able to meet the need for our residents, because the needs aren't being met provincially or federally through funding there. So we continue to work on that front, understanding how vitally important it is. And that was really, brought home very, in a very real way during COVID, when we would have students driving in to park out in front of libraries that were closed, or sitting in coffee shops, or parking out in the county parking lot trying to access Wi-Fi so that they could do their university exams and access school. So really, that's something that can't continue, and we need to come up with some strategies to resolve those issues for everybody. So that's why I'm here. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mayor. That's great. Heather, the first time I raised the issue on Parliament Hill, the House of Commons Committee, I sent a note to members and stakeholders and say, if you have any information to provide, any thoughts, and you were one of the first to reply. So I did want to invite you to participate in this. So please go ahead.
That's great. Thanks so much, Serge. And I'm glad to be in the company of a couple wonderful folks, and hearing your backgrounds and your passions is very encouraging. So I'm Heather Watson, and I'm Executive Director leading Farm Management Canada, which is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing the awareness, appreciation, and adoption of business practices on farms. And so when it comes to, moving ideas to adoption, that's kind of really our bread and butter, where we like to operate. Ours is in more of a business management focus, but I think it's equally applicable to Agtech. You're going to look for fundamental elements that lead from ideation to adoption, and I think it's important to keep those in mind, and especially when you're trying to move forward the adoption of practices on farms. So there needs to be an established value, that the gain is clear, that it solves a problem or presents a new opportunity, that is kind of in the here and now. So it meets farmers where they are and where they've identified they want to go. As well, we find attitude is a big factor as well, so that there's a willingness to make a change. We've been around this marks our 30th year of, trying to increase the adoption of things like business planning, transition planning, looking at different market channels and value add. And we've noticed there definitely has to be that willingness to make a change there. And the other piece is access. And of course, this comes in very many ways, shapes, and forms, from high-speed internet or broadband to cost to, just even physical distance from resources. But there's access to the resources required to change. Infrastructure, so equipment, people, skills, financial means, etc. And then I think lastly, kind of validation, right? Like, it's one thing to take an innovation and implement it, but then, at some time you're going to ask yourself, well, did that make a difference? Did that make our situation better? Did we actually gain efficiencies or economies of scale, or, help the environment a little bit better, et cetera, et cetera. So being able to measure, is the gain real? How are we measuring it? How are we proving it? And should we keep investing in it? And should we invest in more? So I think, accelerating adoption really hinges on these four elements. We see it on the business side of things. And as you'll probably learn quickly, my personal soapbox around innovation and adoption and research, and I think Serge knows this from some of our original communications, is that a lot of effort's been put into production agriculture, production technology for yield and quality, automation, for labor efficiency. but we don't see the same kind of treatment around how innovation and the adoption thereof can apply to managing the farm business and the business practices. So, how can we get better tools for bookkeeping and financial analysis, and some of the things that are really tying farmers up and, tend to be, left on the corner of the desk because, production is so demanding. So I would love to see and have a conversation about how can we equally apply concepts around innovation and ag tech and technology to helping manage the farm business. And then again, I think it's back to what Alana was talking about is, bringing the elements together. So, there's collaboration, there's connection, and how do we stitch that together so that we're kind of making, progress together on all those fronts would be something that we would love to see happen, is a little bit more recognition of the interconnectivity of all these pieces.
Great, thank you so much, Heather. And I think you brought in the idea of collaboration, and I want to jump to one of our questions. How has government, industry, and academia, and businesses and not-for-profits engaged on Agtech adoption and the accessibility of Agtech in rural and regions? And I'm going to start by yourself, Mayor. You are a government official, and there's different levels of government. But if you can start, and then I'll move on to Mike, and then Heather after that.
Certainly, and thank you for the question. I think there's always room for improvement, and I know even just around the challenges of even drone technology and access to supporting wildfire or farming, there's difficulties in getting projects underground or on, off the ground and in the air, just because of even some procurement restraints with dealing with levels of government. You can't sole source contracts necessarily, and if there aren't multiple people that can bid on a project, then it can't be done. So there are some areas where red tape, I think, does fetter innovation, and it does. It's going to take innovating policy as well, not just innovating technology, to be able to support these things. I mean, there's certainly a lot of innovation happening in food product development, but how that actually gets implemented in the real world in agriculture is a challenge. And as anybody on the call knows, the agriculture sector is one of those sectors that has so many competing priorities and players. It is difficult to get a coalescing of voices to understand what is needed. And that's something that often, I think, creates paralysis in government. If you're hearing a lot of different voices, you're not sure, and especially if you're getting competing or conflicting information, it's easier just to say, this is too confusing or complicated. We're not sure where to make a decision, so therefore no decision is made. So I think just being really clear and having more collaboration and alliances to be able to discern and distill what the need is, and then clearly be able to advocate for that, is something that would, I think, drive government to be able to make better policy and make those decisions sooner, because I see that those are some of the issues. And then, of course, there's always the issue of funding. But we know with investments in the right places, that really unlocks GDP. We, in the Edmonton Metro Regional Board, recently did a study around broadband, and investment in broadband and getting strong connectivity in this region here and in the rural regions as well would drive GDP by up to $1 billion a year annually. So it's the chicken and the egg. Do we have money to support these projects? I don't know, but if you don't, this is what you're missing out on. So it's quite a lot of, I think, synchronicity that has to go into planning, and I think that's something that government needs to strive to get better at, both municipal, provincial, and federal. So we are doing some great things, but there is room for improvement. Thanks.
I really appreciate your comment about the multiplicity of voices and the confusion that creates. We did have a webinar a few months ago, actually, on this. We had a couple of we had a former minister, former president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture in attendance. It was quite interesting to see the discussion on that. I would personally agree with sometimes that there is confusion on the message, and that makes it difficult for people to hear. And this is why we're pushing for a national strategy on research and innovation. Mike, if you're able to provide your feedback on this question.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the way that kind of Alana had paraphrased that. I think we have done a lot of good things as a community, but there is so much more that we can do, and kind of prioritizing, spend and federal, provincial, municipal funding efforts to improve rural communications. I think that continues to be the underlying theme that interests us, probably most passionately, and obviously those that constituents that are involved in that. And I agree that underserved communities is a challenge, and until we bridge that digital divide, some of those amazing technological advances that are happening are going to remain inaccessible. So we do have to figure out a way to work collaboratively to prioritize spend to do that. I think there's a glimmer of hope, probably more than a glimmer of hope on the horizon, and that's with the innovation of our wireless networks, and in particular 5G, because I think we will see a shift away from traditional terrestrial means of providing connectivity, right? The idea of getting either copper or fiber out will evolve and be replaced with wireless innovations that are going to make that less cost prohibitive and more efficient to develop. But it's going to take a community to do that, and a collaboration between government, industry, and certainly academia. I will also say, though, on the technical innovation space, there are some interesting things that we've had the privilege to be involved with. One that comes to mind is a collaboration that we have with Olds College in Alberta, just north of Calgary, and some really interesting things that we're able to do there to work with academia to test new technologies and the benefit of these technologies in a working in a farm production environment. And those are really important elements to point to, because they are hard, tangible examples that we can leverage and test business cases against, in which that involve rural connectivity and technical innovation. And they also get our youth involved and inspired to start to look at some of these things, technology entering into agriculture and agri-food systems. So, things like that, I think, are really, really good examples that we can hold up, and we should do more. We've recently stood up a 5G innovation lab with the University of Alberta as well. So, important to have students in academia and industry working together to see, well, how are we going to take, this technology and start to produce solutions that will be for the benefit of all. So yeah, there are some real shining examples, and then I think underscoring Alana's point, so much more that we could do with the good that we have available.
Heather, can I have your take on this question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm kind of like listening to the other speakers and kind of pulling pieces, but like, I think Mike makes a really good point on, the passion and the talent of the youth, and harnessing that through academic institutions, but also through other means of mentorship, and trying to, help make that connection. What we see in our world is, the youth come away from, say college or university, and they're all pumped, they're all enthused about all the cool technology they learned about. But sometimes that same enthusiasm isn't shared back on the farm, and there tends to be, some friction that happens. So trying to empower and encourage youth, and encourage, today's farmers to really look at that, harnessing that passion and that talent of the youth back on the farm, and ways to do that. And then, we see the broadband issues, here and now. Just this morning, we have our National Farm Leadership Program, and, we're trying to run breakout sessions and this really cool, training opportunity. And, someone drops out, or, someone, you can't hear them because their connection's not good enough. So it's, as much as I think, kind of COVID has, I suppose, as a silver lining, helped, with that learning curve, and, everyone's pretty, savvy with the technical side of it, still the infrastructure isn't quite there. And that means, missing out on opportunities for education and training, as Alana was speaking to, but also opportunities to use some of the technology around, cloud-based data management systems and things like that. And then I think going back to another thing that Alana said, on kind of, the funding and the investment, we certainly are really struggling with, kind of the public-private partnership requirements of government funding. So, and we're happy to get, of course, the government support. And we know that skin in the game is really, really important for a lot of these things. But as a nonprofit organization, it makes it really, really difficult to, be able to, come with a great idea and, come with partners that are just are enthused about it without a proof of concept. So we're struggling on that side of things. And it ends up that, those that have the dollars in their jeans, public-private money, no problem, cost share, no problem. But for some of us on the other side of it, that don't have that kind of stability in our back pocket, it makes it a little bit difficult. And then as well, I mean, it's not probably the first time you've heard that, the red tape and the paperwork is incredibly overwhelming and something that, isn't recognized as something that costs money and costs resources. I also think that, in this space that we're operating in, there is a competition for funds, and there's also a need to demonstrate your value as an academic institution, your value as a, provincial ministry, your value as a municipality, whatnot, or, organization. And I think that leads to, operating in silos. It's like, okay, we've got to come up with a really innovative, cool project that people are going to get excited about. But we need to kind of keep some of the limelight because we need to demonstrate our value going forward and that, we have a place in this game. So I think that is kind of, hindering our progress a little bit as well. And then again, I'll just pop back onto my soapbox a little bit on, the production technology side of things and how, that really is dominating the ag tech space. So, I mean, it's great. Obviously, we need technology when it comes to genetics and different varieties and precision ag, different ways of handling our natural resources and natural capital. But, at the same time, I would love to see the same type of enthusiasm and investment in helping producers in managing the business side of farming. We see commodity organizations and commissions and, those getting the checkoff dollars, and they're putting it into production tech because that's where I think perhaps it's more of a tangible, we're seeing the results right away. We see them next season in the field. We see them in the barn. And sometimes when we invest in business practices, it's a bit more of a long game because it takes, people and process and procedure. But the value proposition is there. So again, like I would love to see, the engagement in ag tech as exciting on, the non-production side of agriculture that's equally important to success.
Great, thank you, Heather. I think all of you have made the point that it is difficult to have a good retain good businesses or retain a good sector or push innovation if we don't have good connectivity, right? If I look at myself, right in between Ottawa and Montreal, small families around us, farm families are saying, if we can't have our children in school because they can't have broadband compared to urban settings, are we going to stay in the region? Are we going to continue farming? When we're looking at farmers that have to look at satellite technology to plant crops on their field, but they can't access it because they are not able to due to the connectivity, there's a problem. So my question is, how is broadband access hindering adoption of new technologies in Canada? And Mike, you're from one of the telecoms, so I'm going to ask you, what do you hear on the ground from people on that?
Yeah, there definitely is a gap, because what's happening is our urban centers are far outpacing our rural communities in terms of technical, in terms of connectivity. So if you're, there's always the exceptions, but if you're in an urban center within Canada, chances are you have access to extremely good, fast internet service through one of the providers. And so what that's causing, of course, is this development of technological innovation that relies on that kind of connectivity and those kinds of speeds and throughputs. And so when you get into a rural situation, those technologies start to crumble. They start to fall down. They start to become inaccessible and unusable. And so the idea of bridging the digital divide is the one that is so important. And that the industry, not just we as one particular carrier, but the industry in general, is really kind of enthusiastic about where 5G will take us. And 5G, I think it warrants a bit of, just a bit of a discussion. And Alana talked about the idea of 5010, which is kind of the ultimate, goal. And I believe it should be a short-term goal, because I think we can go well beyond that. But that's the short-term goal of being able to provide ubiquitous coverage to Canadians, and regardless of where they live. Now, that's been achieved in our urban settings, but not in our rural settings, not at all. But 5G is going to be a game changer in terms of where it's going. We've been watching, all of us, right, the evolution of our wireless networks, and up till now they've been just kind of incremental improvements. And coverage has remained a challenge, particularly in rural Canada. But 5G has the opportunity to really change that, to go well beyond 5010, and to bring gigabit speeds even into rural areas that will be game changers and allow the innovation that's happening in urban centers to follow into rural communities. And now there are some things that we need to get right as Canadians when it comes to how we will deploy 5G networks, because this is not just something that we will solve, as carriers independently. This is something that will require, this participation and this full acknowledgement from governments as well, that control the spectrum allocation. So the bandwidth, if you will, the wireless bandwidth, the spectrum that will be used to deploy these networks, if done right. And there's a lot of now good kind of direction and intelligence on how to do it right. If done right, 5G can go a long way towards solving that digital divide and bringing those high throughput, high speeds, high reliable networks to Canadians in rural Canada. So there is a light at the tunnel. If done incorrectly, though, it can put us behind as well, and we could go and talk a little bit about that. But done right, that is a way of really bridging that digital divide.
Mayor, are you seeing the light of the tunnel, or have you heard that before?
I guess, eventually somebody's got to get off their wallet, because as was said, there has to be a certain amount of data movement and processing available to get the precision that is needed for high resolution video, whether you're monitoring animals or weeds, and without the coverage, and whether it's 5G or whether it's using old television infrastructure. I mean, there's a number of ways to solve this issue, which is, again, part of the reason why there's paralysis, because there's no one silver bullet. And we're going to have to look kind of region by region and figure out what is the best business case based on what the needs are there, and then obviously what the cost is. But I see this centralization of services and an urbanization of a population that has been done for the greater good to protect the rural areas. But then in depopulating the rural areas, now everyone sits back and says, well, the business case just isn't there to put those assets and those investments there. But if it was depopulated to be able to maintain the asset of the soil so that Canada can be one of 6 major food and commodity exporters in the world, it's important that we all realize we all have to make investments to make sure that those rural areas are provided for, and that there's a standard of living and access to services that are needed to drive, the second major contributor to GDP in this country. But those are the issues we're having is, whose responsibility is it? And while there's really nobody out there anyway, nobody has any idea. It might look vacant, but there's a lot of activity going on, and there's billions of dollars being invested. And we need to figure out who's responsible to do that. And ultimately, I think government has to take leadership roles and have good policy that creates some certainty for investment for providers. But knowing that you can't just, as they say, suck the jelly out of the donut, or take the cream business case in more densely populated areas and then leave the rurals to figure it out. So, I guess that's a bit of my soapbox or my rant, but it's also difficult to adopt this technology because of resistance and because of change, but also because of the transition we're seeing in agriculture right now between family farms versus corporate farms. And corporate farms might be able to come up with the funding to make the investments into some of those new autonomous technologies or the programs that they need to run their business, so to speak. But then there's still the need to support the family farm, but there is going to be barriers to access because of just the cost of new technology. And so how do we support making sure that we're coming up with policy that supports agriculture, whether you're agriculture family farm or agriculture corporate farm? We have to try to ride two horses with the same backside on that front. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Heather. That all give you a good segue to intervene on this. So please go ahead.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, no, a lot was said in the last few minutes, and I appreciate it very much. I mean, I would love to hope, and I want to kind of ride along with you, Michael, as we search for and encounter that light at the end of the tunnel. I'm just, I'm not convinced, but I hope I'm wrong. We're seeing, the world of communication, education, virtual learning is just constantly evolving and advancing. But I think, the rural urban divide is just, more and more are getting left behind. And as, decisions are being made by those urban centers, like Alana said, the business case just isn't there for what about everybody else. But I mean, we should have the power to make that a priority, right? Like we should be able to lend voices. And I'm thinking, like, as I was thinking about this question, listening to you guys talk, I thought, like my kind of first foray into agriculture as a career, back in 2007, there was a government initiative that was sponsoring, investment in rural broadband. And so through this investment, we did kind of this road show, and I was kind of doing the part of all the wonderful, learning opportunities that were available, high speed, resources and things like that to manage your farm business. And, that was 15 years ago, and I'm not sure that we've made any progress. Like, I feel like I could make the same presentation and be like, maybe one day it'll come, just, don't hold your breath. But I do think that, I mean, I don't know what the solution is, but I hear you loud and clear, Lana, when you talk about, we want to keep agricultural land agricultural, and okay, so everybody go to the urban centers, but then not having that that critical mass to bring the infrastructure. And at some point, someone just has to make that decision and say this is a priority and it's going to get done. Much like a lot of other things. And I'm glad that Sturgeon and his organization are trying to kind of shake the bars on this a little bit, or shake the trees, however you want to see it, and get more discussion about this. Because as you look at the whole wide world of ag tech, and knowing that we're our own worst enemy by impeding something as simple as infrastructure. It's one thing to change somebody's mind about something and okay, should I adopt this? Shouldn't I? And changing behavior. But when it comes to infrastructure, it's quite technical, and therefore I feel like there's a simpler solution. But again, I mean, lots of players, lots of folks interested. Who is taking the lead? Who should take the lead? That always seems to be where the conversation goes, and we end up in a bit of a stalemate sometimes. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but I think, there should be light at the end of the tunnel, and I really hope that there is. And I hope you can get us there, Mike.
Well,
what,
and yeah, go ahead, Mike.
You know what, just to top up on that, because it's there sincerely is, right? I'll just, in terms of specificity, just and this is something we can all help with, right? And Serge and this organization's in a very very important position to be able to help to advocate for this message. But it's one that's to try to boil it down can be quite straightforward. So there is a wireless networks require wireless spectrum. So it's just like operating a radio, just like operating television signals over the airs. Wireless networks require spectrum. There's a very important allocation of spectrum, referred to as the 3800 megahertz spectrum allocation, that will be auctioned in 2023. Now that piece of spectrum is critically important to the deployment of 5G networks. It's that spectrum that is critically important. There was a preceding spectrum auction on the 3500 spectrum allocation, which TELUS participated in, and now 3800 is next. Without 3800, we can't deploy 5G to rural networks. So we need that critical spectrum. Our spectrum auction policy framework, run by the federal government, has been flawed in the past, in that it has had some strange rules that have had some set-asides for small regional players. The intention was right. The intention was to allow small regional carriers to come in and compete and deploy networks. But deploying networks is extremely capital intensive and expensive. And what has happened was these spectrum allocations that were allocated to some smaller regional players have gone unused. That is a horrible tragedy for we as Canadians, to have valuable spectrum unallocated but unused for the betterment of our population. And what we're advocating for, and what we could really use the voice of the agriculture community and the rural community to help to support, is to say, listen, let's make the rules on spectrum allocation really transparent. Let's have a use it or lose it policy. If you get allocated spectrum as a carrier, you must deploy that spectrum and use it for the betterment of Canadians. We're obviously prepared to do that. But that rule has to be embedded. The other one is we're advocating for a cap on allocation. So there's an industry-wide understood, very well understood fact that carrier will require about 100 megahertz of spectrum in that precious 3800 allocation to deploy 5G networks on a rural basis. And so that means 4 allocations, four carriers capped to be able to go in and compete in those networks. And we are absolutely advocating for that. We would suggest, listen, let's give carriers the opportunity to solve these problems. And when they do get allocated this spectrum, make sure that it is a use it or lose it. When we receive that spectrum, we will deploy it. We will deploy that spectrum for the benefit of rural Canadians. And that could be an absolute game changer. So I'm really encouraged about it. This is something, I've been in this game a long time, and I think this is something that could be a real significant game changer. I've spent most of my career actually deploying networks in rural areas. And this, I think, can be a real game changer if we get it right. And we're going to need everybody to make sure that spectrum allocation policy is done properly and done, for the benefit of rural Canadians.
Thank you, Mike. And before Alan, I just posted the link to the consultation that the government is doing
thank you, Serge,
on the auction, and I think it'd be great for people to voice their concern on this. Alana, sorry, I cut you off.
It's fine. Back to collaboration and the importance of distilling voices. I think there's also a growing opportunity in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. And certainly we've spent a number of years building relationships with our Indigenous First Nations neighbors. And I think especially when you're looking for the necessity to build your subscription to support a business case, it's certainly important to be very inclusive, making sure that you look at everybody in your community and understanding the needs of everybody and understanding how we can all, rising tides float all boats. And so we need to make sure that nobody is left behind. And so any of this work going forward needs to be, I think, highly inclusive. And certainly we know based on, commitments that have been stated by the federal government, and there's an expectation that they follow through, that they make funds available to Indigenous communities as well to improve their standard of living. So anytime that we can make those allegiances and alliances, because it is fair and beneficial to both parties, I would just challenge folks to continue to have those conversations or to start them if you haven't had them already. So I just wanted to make that comment as well. Thanks.
And that's a great comment. Actually, some Indigenous communities have said that they should be owning the spectrum over the territory, their territory. So that's an important thought as well on that. And we also can't forget the northern communities, especially as we are looking at new technologies there to make food more local and to look at improving food security in some of those areas. So absolutely. Lots of work to be done. I did post the link. I am not sure whether or not participants, attendees see it. So if someone in the Q&A wouldn't mind typing a question saying, yes, we can see the link, that would be great. I see it. I think the attendee, the panelists can see it, but I'm not sure the attendees can. That's my limitation. Yes, we can, Jean said. And Jean Howden did have a question. If the solutions are good for farm businesses, where are they in the equation? Students, academics, and digital providers are good. Heather, do you have any suggestion on how we capture and scope the producers' businesses' requirements rather than being told what can be done for producers? Heather, that's a question directed to you, although I'll ask others as well to provide their feedback if they do.
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that I would love to have help answering, to be quite honest. As I was kind of preparing for this talk, I thought, well, what do we know, like from, the trusted resources about the use and adoption of technology on farms, and of course the needs. And so I go to my trusty Census of Agriculture, and they're still asking, do you use a computer? Do you use a smartphone? So I was like, oh man, like that's so discouraging. But to be fair, they're starting to ask about GPS, GIS mapping, automation, and renewable energy systems. So that's definitely a good thing. But I think, it would be really great. We do our own surveys, of course. We survey about the adoption of practices and, what the needs are, what kind of learning opportunities, what kind of topics, etc. We don't get too much into the technology side of things because it does tend to turn into a production conversation. But I would love to explore that a little bit further in terms of how could technology help and alleviate some of the barriers or some of the even the opportunities, unearth some of the we have some ideas, but to be just quite honest and frank, we haven't checked it out yet, although it would make a great research project and maybe a partnership project to see, because like I say, we've got ideas on how automation, and we see it, right? Like there's a group out of Quebec that's working on automated bookkeeping for farmers. There's a group in New Zealand that's working on kind of having like an HR management system that's online and kind of integrated. So everyone has this app on their phone and you can see what field everyone's in, what are they doing, what the tasks they were given that day, and kind of, be able to monitor that on a micro level, but on a macro level as well, helping the farm manager, have a little easier job managing their people. But I think we could really kind of spread that out and really see what's possible and what's potential for not just technology that's going to help, with the business management practices, but also how existing technology connects to and helps inform business management practices. Because I think oftentimes, again, there's a bit of a silo thing happening, saying, okay, we've got this technology, cool, we know about, yield and input efficiencies and things like that, but how does that connect with the larger financial picture? With inflation rates and interest rates on the rise, what does that mean for ag tech adoption? Is that going to hinder it? I mean, surely the easiest equation in my head is, yeah, that's probably going to hinder adoption, but not necessarily. If we had a means to connect that information and do some number crunching, but also, look at the bigger picture of where the farm wants to go and how everyone's going to continue to feel passionate about what they're doing through technology, I think that would shine some light too. But I really love that question. I'm literally going to write that down as a new research project we should look into specifically.
Mike, Alana, would you like to take a stab to answer that as well, or?
A quick top up, if I could. I think, yeah, it's a fascinating area, and it's one where we kind of share that same perspective, Heather, on, it's not, and I shouldn't even use the word just about production, because that's so important, but it's probably a better term. It's also about connecting, that logic back to the farm and the farm operations. We've taken a little stab at that as well. I think probably more than a little stab. We have a solution within our portfolio called Farm in Hand, and that solution within our portfolio is actually directed at specifically that. So it's not about the precision agronomy or the on-farm or the production side. It's about the actual farm management side, and things like we kind of referred to it sometimes as kind of the Quicken for farms. So it's probably not the be all and end all. I think what you're actually referring to, and where the correction or where the question was directed, I think is far more sophisticated. But it's a really interesting kind of foray or start in like a demonstrable evidence of a solution that a farm can deploy to help with farm management. And I think, as we continue to evolve that business, I think some of the things that are being referred to could be incorporated and developed into that kind of an environment to help farmers and producers. Check it out for what it's worth. If anyone's interested, it's you can see it on our website. It's called Farm in Hand, and it does offer some of those solutions today.
My only addition would really just be the importance of connection, whether it's for marketing or for community or for just gathering information. I mean, there's so much changing out there on a regular basis. It's not like anyone's getting the periodicals in the mail that they used to get. That's just not necessarily how people are able to access relevant information. So the ability to be able to connect in real time and watch videos, or even around some of the challenges we found in Alberta in the last few years with some new safety standards, was even the development of potential standardized safety programs that would be accessible to farmers to be able to have their staff go online, learn things, go through a series of tests and then go back for refreshers. Again, if you don't have access to internet, then you can't even use what most businesses take for granted on a day-to-day basis. So I mean, that's very simple, but that's just one place that it's obviously farm safety is part of how you protect the liability of your business, and how you inform and protect your labor, and how you educate everybody. So again, if you've got dial-up speed, none of that is happening. And you're really suddenly living in isolation and in digital poverty, and we need to resolve that issue. Thanks.
Thank you. And it looks like some people are having definitely connection issues. It looks like Christine, who's our technical person here, is appearing and disappearing and making everybody also host, although she does live in Ottawa. So they maybe the demonstration is giving her technical issues on this. Heather, doesn't affect you, so I'm not too sure. But no, thank you for this. Mayor, you are in a rural region, and if you talk to people in your municipality, and especially farmers, but not just farmers, actually, ag innovators, small companies, SMEs that are thinking of setting up or that are set up, what are they telling you? Are they telling you that they are as competitive as others, and that their broadband issues are creating problems or not? What are they telling you on the ground?
Connectivity is definitely an issue for them to be able to do, especially if they're a part of a larger organization. Sometimes they have to use a particular software that's standard within their business. And if they don't have appropriate download speeds, they can't even operate, under the mothership, so to speak. So there's definitely challenges there. And again, with residents and with the surveys we did, a number of people can't expand their business, or if they're going to expand, they're going to have to leave. Or if they're looking for employment pool, again, people are hesitant now to move out to rural municipalities. Some of the first questions that realtors are asked is, what's the broadband like? So again, an important part of any ag business is access to qualified labor. And if you can't get people out in your communities because they can't access healthcare, education, and internet for more than just Netflix, they're not coming here. And then you're losing a talent pool. So that's just one of the challenges that I've heard about, and look forward to hearing from others as well. Thanks.
Great. No, that's a great answer that I'm hearing the same thing. So it does definitely matches the issues. Heather, what are you hearing from the farmers that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, I would say very similar things. I was even thinking back to a recent conversation. We're having our virtual board meetings as our organization, and majority of our directors are farmers. And, the side conversation, as you wait for people to arrive, was, oh, hey, did that service arrive for you? I forget what it was called. It was something in Manitoba, but like talking actively about, oh yeah, my neighbor tried it and they said, oh, it didn't really deliver on its promises. So I'm not sure if I'm gonna, but I kind of need something because I've got obligations and things. So it seems to be, trial and error, but definitely a lot of frustration around not being able to access, the same information that others do. Like, I can't say it any better than I think Alana did, is just being left in the dark, like literally. And I love that term, digital poverty. I haven't heard it before, but I'm going to start using it because, especially the things we do are all around lifelong learning and education, and really, really pushing that to say, like, keep on top of things, and, assess your situation, assess your opportunities. Well, if you literally can't do that, then, that makes our job really difficult, but it also makes, running a successful, competitive, modern farm business very difficult as well. So yeah, our folks are just waiting and trying anything that works as in when they can. We again, in some of our virtual learning last week, one of the farmers actually got into their tractor and went to the top of the highest hill on their farm so that they could tune into our leadership program. So I mean, they're willing to go to great lengths, but they shouldn't have to.
Great. No, I appreciate that. Mike, your organization, your company has been, forward-looking. I've got to say, you've created TELUS Ag. You've done a few things, and you also hear from people on the ground. And the plug that I just made that will not reduce my TELUS phone bill, but what opportunities exist in the adoption of technologies, and what are you hearing in terms of opportunities that you and your colleagues from the various telecoms could support through better access to broadband?
Yeah, it does really come down to there's really two key things that are taking place right now. Carriers, we're pushing fiber further into rural communities, and that's important because those are going to be the backhaul points, the points at which we aggregate and backhaul data, which will be used, collected, disseminated in a wireless means. So the wireless infrastructure, or the wireline infrastructure, fiber based, continues to remain extremely important. And we are certainly investing heavily to push fiber deeper into rural communities. Now, when you think about terrestrial distribution, like on the ground, in the ground where you put a plow, or in the ground and run a piece of fiber out, you can imagine how expensive that is, right? To do that, and how complicated that would be, and almost inconceivable to think that we would be able to do that to every rural residence and location, topography, distance, geography, all of those things. However, as you push fiber deeper into rural areas, those become collection points for the future wireless networks. And so that's why, the 5G enablement, which really is a step function increase in terms of capability, throughput, reliability, speed. Like, just imagine 5G, the capability, the densification it will serve, whether rural or urban. You think about 1 square kilometer of territory, 1 square kilometer of a region, and think about 1 million IoT enabled devices within that 1 square kilometer. Like, that's a game changer. That is going to put technology on things and connectivity on devices that we aren't even conceiving of today because of what it's able to do. So it is a step function increase. However, I come back to Heather, I don't know if I can borrow your soapbox for a moment. I'll just the idea that it is really important that we get the spectrum piece right? Like, spectrum is something, it's finite, it's limited, it's something we will all as Canadians benefit from if allocated correctly to carriers who will deploy it. This is something that will go a long way towards solving rural connectivity, and it is this next spectrum band, the 30 to 3800 spectrum band, that is so important. If that is done incorrectly, if that is allocated to whomever, carrier or not, that's not going to use it, that's going to sit on it on the anticipation that if I sit on this precious bandwidth for the next 5 years and do nothing with it, it'll do nothing but increase in value, and I'll be able to sell it in the future to a higher bidder. Well, financially, yes, that's exactly what's going to happen. But we Canadians are going to wait for accessibility to that, so we can't allow our process of spectrum allocation to work that way. We have to deploy it now. We should deploy it to carriers who are ready to deploy that technology, and that will be for the betterment of all Canadians. The math says it, right? Like 37% of rural Canadians have access to 5010 bandwidth today. That's horrible. That's horrible, right? It's got to change.
And that's even a high number based on what my experience is. I'm even surprised at 37%. I thought it was lower, but it is shameful indeed. And I do, AIC does agree that we need to make sure that auction, the spectrum goes to companies that are ready to deploy it. We've said it to the minister's office, and the reason I put the link for the consultation is to make sure that other people put their voices on the same issue and be heard on this. Absolutely. How do we compare to other countries? And I'm not sure, Mike, can you provide us a bit of an idea on this?
Yeah, I mean, Canada, we're obviously unique. Just look at our geographic footprint, right? So it's very difficult to compare us to a European country, although we do all the time. But just population densification, 90% of us are all along this little line, right, down at the bottom of our country. And so the challenge is that there's 10 or 15% of us that are not, and those are really, really expensive areas in which to cover. That said, though, we are enjoying as a country some incredible speeds and some incredible connectivity, primarily in urban-based communities, but the rural is definitely starting to push out and get further densified. So it's rural America. I would say, just speaking from my experience in the industry for 35 years, far behind where we are as Canadians. There are urban areas within the United States that still don't have high-speed connectivity service. So it's so we have a lot to be proud of, and we are doing a lot of things right. And don't get me wrong, our spectrum allocation process, although definitely room for significant improvement on this next batch, it has been working. And so we as Canadians have been enjoying some very positive things. But we don't, I think it's important to say, like, what's right for our geography, what's right for our topography, and for our citizens. And let's be global leaders. Let's not even think about comparing ourselves to countries who are less fortunate.
Alana, Heather, anything to add on that, on the global comparison? Alana first.
Some of the research I've seen is that Canada is the 19th fastest download speed in the world. But again, that would be predominantly in urban areas. And when you look at the size of the country and the value proposition of what is held in our resources, whether it's in forests or ag or traditional, fossil fuels, we need the supports and the mechanisms to be able to appropriately utilize those resources to the benefit of the country. So yes, we're doing well in some areas, but there's these vast missing links in others that are really costing us as a society and as a country because of the lack of technology that's available because of our limited access to internet. Canadians are also seen as slow adopters of technology because of that, because it is a frustrating thing. So then how are you staying competitive on the world scale when you're technologically disadvantaged just because of the frustration and the struggle around it? I mean, that hurts us across the board, both, I think, from a perspective of just as a culture. So we definitely need to make those improvements there. And I would say as well, with the urbanization and the disconnect between folks and their food, there's that drive and that interest in agriculture tourism or agritourism, so that people can understand why these vast spaces are so important and why they deserve our care and attention. But again, as an agriculture producer who's wanting to perhaps step out into even ag tourism for education purposes, how do you connect with your customers? How, if you don't even have necessarily accurate Google Maps, I mean, we still have that issue. And even as some of our first responders have found now that certain dispatches are being centralized, they're going on flawed data in those centralized dispatchers. So they're sending often police and ambulance to the wrong address because they don't have clean data. So, we've got a number of issues in rural areas because of lack of access to technology, and part of that, the cost of that is unclean data, which puts lives at risk as well. So we've got, like I said, beginning remarks, room for improvement, and so I hope that rules and regulations around the CRTC can be modernized to be able to meet the needs of Canada, because we are not a developing country. We're supposed to be developed, but on this front, we're lagging.
Heather, a few notes on this?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is just, access, is both physical, but also cost. And I remember I did my studies in the UK, and it was just like the price of internet and data on your cell phones, and even cell phones were just, it was just crazy when I came back. Like, I'd never had a cell phone in Canada before. It was years ago. But, coming back and just looking at, it's going to cost me what? And I only have this much data, or, and over there, it's like, it's so much cheaper, and it's unlimited data for everyone. And, that maybe has something to do with the spectrum that Mike talks about. And there's only so much room and so many, spots on the wireless connection. But I think we have to be conscious of cost as well. Because I remember we were living rural before I moved to Ottawa, and it was astronomical just to have like a decent connection to the internet. And we, made that choice that, yeah, this is worth the investment. But it's like, well, why should we pay more than, our urban counterparts? So I just wanted to make note of, like I'm all for, better connectivity, more connectivity, give us all the opportunities, but it has to be within a certain price point as well. If I can dream and if I can ask for everything under the sun, I just think we need to be conscious of that, and especially in rural communities, because it's not like producers have a lot of, cash that's just floating around. It's going back into the farm, and rightfully so. So we're not all flush. So let's be conscious of cost as well.
Great. No, thank you, Heather, on this. Indeed, the affordability of all technologies need to be looked at. I'm going to go back on my soapbox, which is a call for a national strategy for agri-food research and innovation, and I'm going to put a link on that for everybody to see and to add the names of their organization, sending it to all the attendees, and I'm hoping to see a few emails to let me know that they are adding their names. Now, what can participants in today's events and the people that are going to be watching this later on, and even AIC's network, what can people do to push for changes on this and a better positive outcome? Alana, I'm going to start by you. What should people do?
Advocate for sure. Reach out to your municipal leaders, to your MLAs, and to your MPs, because you might not get a reply. Perhaps I would hope that you would, but still, them hearing from you and understanding how vital it is very important, because often silence is mistaken for permission or for acceptance, and we have to be very loud and clear that this is unacceptable, and we do have to find ways forward. So I would say certainly connecting and going on, if your municipality or anybody is asking you to do a speed test, like I mentioned CIRA before, if you go on their website and take advantage of their speed test, that is real-time data. And a number of organizations look at that data to be able to make decisions. And I would say, Mike's comment around allocation of spectrum. I mean, it's unheard of that you would be able to sit on an asset and almost, cover a certain amount of market share and not actually provide a service. Again, back to even just some of the earlier studies that we undertook, it was difficult to find out where the dark fiber was, because these are like trade secrets. People didn't want to disclose this information. But this is a vital utility. It's like having houses without roads or high rises without elevators. We need, for the digital commute, we are required to have now this new utility. And I think all governments have to look at it as a utility, and certainly make different policy decisions very quickly to be able to meet these needs. So advocate and speed test would be my 2 cents, and be an adopter. I know there's risk associated with that, but if we don't adopt and implement things, they just sit on shelves. Implementation is always the challenge. So that takes individual decisions and courage, but we know that's what ag producers are all about. So those would be my comments. Thanks.
And I really appreciate that, Mayor. As you know, Ottawa is looking at some of those issues, and the industry committee is going to be looking at rural broadband soon as well. We are going to be asked to testify on this. I do hope that your voice and others can resonate either directly or through organizations such as ours. I think it'd be great to be vocal on those things. So I do agree with you on the advocacy part. Heather, can you tell us what your thoughts are on what can participants do?
Yeah, I think I would jump on what Alana said around, continuing to raise awareness and providing, like real data, real proof, to have those vital comparisons, even if it is with other countries. I'm thinking like Australia, for example, like find where some of those comparisons, do make sense, and maybe rural America too. But then, I was thinking as well as advocating, with your MPs, et cetera, certainly the commodity groups are there for that, and general farm organizations. But, the importance of trying to find, a stronger single voice than kind of multiple very tiny voices that sometimes get pinned against each other. Let's be realistic. But, certainly working on, and I think this is kind of what you're doing, Sarah, with your organization, working towards a movement, working towards a collaborative effort and a framework that folks can get behind and kind of, parse out their little piece that they're going to take care of and make sure that everything's okay. But it's all kind of, still part of the whole, and we're all, on the bus in the same direction, and we know who's driving, and we know who's in what seats, and those are the seats they're supposed to be in. So I think, advocating on that side of things. And then for me, from this conversation, certainly, I would love for farmers that are listening to consider how ag tech innovation and technology can support their farm business management practices and decision making, including, what ag tech they could bring into their farm, even from the production side, of course, vitally important. But how is that connecting with your vision, your business goals, the people that you have available, the skills you have available, and the outside support? So thinking about, ag tech and innovation in that lens of managing my farm for prosperity and sustainable growth. And then I would say for the government, industry, academia, and everyone else under the sun is just, again, like, consider broadening our definition of ag tech beyond production technology to include how technology can, support strategizing, planning, managing people, profit, and the planet. And trying to kind of sew that up in a nice, neat package. And I'm encouraged to hear, I am aware of some of the tools that you have, Mike, at TELUS and Farm at Hand and then decisive farming, things like that. So I'm encouraged that, you're looking towards that as well. Because I think if we can't make the connection of how those things work together and inform each other, then, we could get all the production technology in the world, but, the financial resources aren't there, or they're there for now, but they're not going to be there in 5 years, or the next generation doesn't give a damn, things like that. I think, the strategy is just as important as the okay, now what are we going to do? So that would be my, I hope people take those away today. And of course, clicking on the links that you sent in the chat. I know that's what I've done. I've brought up those pages to make sure that I lend my support if I haven't already done so.
You haven't, so we'll look forward to your support on that. Mike, your thoughts?
Well, I think first of all, Lana and Heather said it extremely well. The only thing I could offer in terms of maybe the simplicity of the message, as we all think about how we can advocate for the proper allocation of spectrum, the message is simple. I think it's use it or lose it. I think it's that's the one thing that we just have to kind of hammer home as the message. We can't have entities, whomever they are, sitting on valuable spectrum and not using it. So use it and lose it. That's it. Simple. Something that we should all be working on. The other thing, as it not directly related to the the communications and the rural connectivity, but more generally solutions that are out there, I would just encourage us all to continue to look at some of the really innovative things that are out there and that are being developed for the betterment of everyone in agriculture and agri-food systems. One of the many service providers now, we have solutions that are really focused on helping those in the value chain for food systems be more efficient, more effective, whether they are a farmer, a rancher, a producer, a manufacturer. We also have solutions that are focused on the sustainability of our ecosystem, our food ecosystem. So the idea of greenhouse gas reductions and being able to demonstrably point to improved sustainable production. And then we have solutions that are also focused on food safety and the idea of origins of food and where they come from and how we do. We as consumers are all interested in this question of, is my food healthy? Is it safe? And, was it sustainably produced? And that is what we are working hard to try to answer through the digitization, of our value chain and our system. So, just for anyone interested, have a look and see if there's things there that could help you achieve your goals, your business goals. And after all, we learn through engaging with our customers and those who are interested in our products and services. And So we are doing our best to kind of try to bring innovative solutions to the table, and would love feedback on what folks think about the product portfolio we have and where we could continue to improve it for their betterment.
I appreciate that, Mike, and I know that your organization has done quite a bit of work on this. And you know what? You've reached out to us, right? You've reached out to AIC, you've reached out to the people on the ground and asked some key questions. So we do appreciate that. It's nice to actually have someone consulting the end users on this. So, you know, we're getting to the end of it, and I'd like to give an opportunity to the three of you to, you know, in a couple of minutes, tell us your parting shots on this issue, right? We have a major issue in Canada, and while we may compare somewhat well to our neighbors to the south, if I look at Europe and I look even at some parts in Asia, I'm not sure we compare that well. What do we do? What are your parting shot on this? And yeah, we advocate. We do a number of things related to that. But give me your parting shot if you can. Heather, I'm going to start by you. Then I'll go to Alana, and then I'll go to Mike.
All right. Well, geez, I feel like I already kind of gave my last hurrah comments in hoping what people will take away from today's broadcast. Right. But well, let's see. Now you've kind of caught me off guard. I guess
I'll put Mike then, and we'll come back to you. No problem.
Oh, it's all right. I'll just say, you know, Mike, when you said use it or lose it, I just thought that's a great mantra for ag tech in general. And maybe that's what I would say. And Alana, you talked about the importance of, you know, taking a chance and being the early adopters. And we need early adopters. Like certainly, you know, our organization on the business management side, you know, there's you know, there's a pretty small percentage of what we would call farm management enthusiasts from the business perspective. And it's really about that attitude and that willingness to try something different, to try something new and see how it goes. So I mean, I just think of that use it or lose it in that context and saying like, you know, encouraging the industry to continue to seek innovations and ideas and continue with, you know, kind of the pathway towards adoption, which of course is, you know, the knowledge translation and the extension, and trying to get information in the hands of farmers and those that are influencing farmers, so that they can make informed decisions for their operation from a business side and production side as well. But yeah, because if we just kind of let these things sit on the shelf and we're not actively moving towards adoption or trying to, then, you know, the investments might go elsewhere. So I really like that use it or lose it. And I think it applies in the general context, but I absolutely appreciate within your spectrum context. Yes, for sure.
Fantastic. Thank you, Heather. I knew you could go and say a couple more things. Alana, your turn, please.
I think, you know, and I hate to berate this, and I'm sure producers have heard it before, but we need to get better at articulating our story. People have to understand that for the most part, farmers are early adopters, and it's out of necessity. And I also think most people don't understand how sophisticated farming has become and how important access to innovation and investment and support around that is. Because again, on the surface, much like a duck, looks like there's not a lot going on, but there is a tremendous amount of activity going on that nobody can see or understand. So I think it's really important for producers to start to tell their story, because it's the lack of understanding from, I think, the larger urban voting base that is misunderstanding what the needs are and what those producers offer to our, you know, not just GDP, but the security of our food supply chain, which we know is a little more brittle than what anybody understood. So again, just communicate, tell your story, and explain what you need and why, because that builds trust, and trust helps helps for one another to understand what our situation is, and then to be able to fill some needs and remove some barriers that are there. So yeah, find a
Right.
city friend and tell your story. And let them see the inside of your cab with, like, 4 iPads probably, and technology at your fingertips that blows their mind. So yeah, tell some
I think
stories.
I think that's a very good point, Alana. And we've said that before in various forums. The farming is no longer what it used to be. It's changed dramatically, and I think our urban friends have forgotten that, or are not completely attuned to the change. The last thing I want to see now on things on agriculture is the nice picture of the red barn with a little side and a nice little prairie with a cow on this. That's no longer what farming is. Sure, there are nice little red barns. I may actually have one, but it's not. You're entirely right. It's the iPad. It's the technology. It's the robotics, the artificial intelligence, the satellite connections. But all of this need good connectivity. And Mike, your parting shot on this. 2 minutes, and after that, I'll say a couple of words and thank everyone. So, Mike, please, 2 minutes.
All right. Well, maybe I'll top up, because this has been such a constructive and positive discussion. A little bit of positive energy. Sometimes thinking about what's working right gives us a bit of energy to go fix what's not quite right yet. And we as Canadians, right, we have a lot to be thankful for. Here we are with some of the best freshwater and arable land resources in the world. And I really think if we do work to empower our growers and our food producers with technology, enabling them to just compete on a global stage, we can do far more than our fair share of feeding the world, right? And that's really where I think there's a lot of positive for us in Canada. We are humble Canadians, but you know what? This little thing we have here, TELUS, that we're working on, we're starting to attract the attention of a lot of global players, because we have become, over the last few years, humbly and quietly, the largest, most capable food system digitization solution provider on the planet. So here in Canada, homegrown, we are now being looked at globally as quite the semblance of capability in terms of digitizing global food supply chains, and that was born right here in Canada. So I think if we keep that up, if you think about what we have in terms of potential as a country for food production, we support it with infrastructure, communication, and technology, I think the future could be really, really bright for all of us.
Thank you very much, Mike, for this. Thank you, Alana. Thank you, Heather. It's been fantastic, and some participants have already indicated that they love it. I see the Dr. Stanford Blade on social media thanking everybody, including you, Alana. So that's already done. Thank you, Dr. Blade, the Dean of the Agriculture at U of A. Wonderful discussion. Thank you, Heather, for putting your name as one of the organizations, the Farm Management Council, as one of the organizations supporting our call for a national strategy. You already have been added to the list that's online, and we're looking forward to others as well. It's been a great time. Just to reinforce a couple of things. For us, this is not the end of the discussion, right? It is a continuing and continuous push to improve access to technology for the farming community and for the agri-food community as well in various settings. We do need to enable better adoption of new technologies, and that's part of the research and innovation continuum. It's nice to innovate, but if Canadians can't use the innovation and they go south or they go somewhere else, that's a major problem. So it is our responsibility to not just look at the research part of the continuum. It's important for organizations such as AIC to promote the adoption part as well. Thank you to our sponsors, Emily Canada, Gallings, and Aguas Bio. Thank you so much for continuing to sponsor the series. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great rest of the day, and we'll continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks all.